Well, understanding and working with children and youth in emotional times, and oh my goodness, are these ever emotional times? As Athena said, it's been many, many days. Our whole world has turned upside down. It has completely shifted on its axis. I know I remember exactly the day that it happened. It was the evening of March the 12th. I was talking to my husband and I got the message from my school board that they were shutting down, closing down the next day to have a study day about this new pandemic that had just been announced. And after that, the schools did not open. So things have happened and it's causing huge waves of emotion. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want us to really understand what it is that is happening inside of us and inside of our children, how that affects our behavior and how that affects our learning. One of the things that I think is the hardest for all of us in education, um, those of you, all of you as teachers, you are planners, you think ahead. You always, not only are you doing what it is you're doing with the children in your care, not only are you thinking about what you're going to do on Monday, what you're going to do next week, what are you going to do next month, you're already thinking about what you're going to do next year. Every one of you in March had already in the back of your mind planned what you were going to do that was the same because it worked really well, and what you were going to do differently because you were not happy with it. And so you had plans. And when the pandemic hit, all of those plans stopped. One of our vice principals at St. John's Elementary School for Riverside School Board, Valerie Kaya, when we were communicating with her about a project, one of the things she wrote, and this really struck me, is she said, "This is not the vision of school we hold in our hearts. This is not how we had planned to teach our children. This is not how we planned and want to interact with our children." And you'll notice that there's a heart and a tear because there is a lot of sadness in all of us around the things that we now cannot do or do in the way that we're used to doing them. What I'm hoping to help you here is to see what's going on, because it's a world that has changed dramatically, and sometimes we feel that we're walking around with blinders. Um, and if we can see a bit more clearly about what's happening, that will actually help you to know what to do even in uncertain times. There is no recipe, there is no formula. There's never been a recipe or a formula. But if we have a better sense of what it is that is happening in front of us, we're going to have a better idea of what it is that we can do. And each of you are going to do that in your own way. But I think we can do is just develop some basic guiding principles of things that will make a difference in the situation that we find ourselves. In effect, we're seeing all sorts of behaviors right now, a lot of anxiety and panic, and perhaps even some phobias, some fear, worry, restlessness, self-doubt, even panic attacks. We're seeing a lot more impatience, some sarcasm and insults and irritability, maybe even some acting out and aggression, some self attacks, some impatience. We're seeing resistance, lack of motivation, being lethargic, maybe even being oppositional. And these are all behaviors that we see, but where do they come from? Well, they come from our emotional world. And in the last 20 years, the neuroscience has alerted to us the importance and the vastness and the strength of our emotional world, which we no longer can ignore. And so, this is what I want to share with you today. Are some thoughts about that some of our greatest thinkers have brought to us about what it is that's happening in our emotional world. Um, I make reference to Dr. Gordon Neufeld because he has pulled this together, but there are many, many other researchers, Panksepp, Dollard and Miller, and others who have looked at these things, but I'm presenting the framework that Dr. Neufeld has used to pull all this information together. So what is it that causes us as human beings to have the most emotional reaction, and that is facing separation. And if there's one thing that COVID has done for us, at the coronavirus, it has pushed our face into separation. It has made us think about getting sick and possibly getting so sick that we are no longer able to be with the people that we love. So we are facing a big crisis right now, a human crisis, because we're facing so much separation. There are three big emotions that are evoked by facing separation. The first one is pursuit, which is we're moved to restore proximity. Many of you probably reached out and called and did FaceTime with people that you hadn't talked to in a long time because you wanted to know if they were okay. The other emotion that comes when we're facing separation is alarm. And when we're alarmed, we are moved to caution and moved to avoid that which alarms. I'm sure many of you have never washed your hands as many times as you have right now. We have put on masks, something that we never thought that we would do. We are doing all sorts of things to make sure that we're avoiding catching this virus that could possibly affect us. The other thing, the other third emotion that comes along with this triad is the one called frustration. Now, usually we see the manifestation of frustration that is really not that pleasant, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But actually, frustration is a very important emotion because it provides us with the energy to affect change and to fix the problem. Where the problems come with the emotion of frustration is when you can't fix the problem and what happens, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, where does all this come from? Well, it comes from our limbic system, our emotional brain, and it's right there in the middle of our brain. And it actually is it provides these emotions, and these emotions will move us to protect ourselves. It all starts with the amygdala, which is our smoke detector. It notices that something is happening. It communicates with our hypothalamus. The hypothalamus allows all of our systems, our whole body, to react in a way that will be in our best interest for survival. And it's also linked to the hippocampus, which is involved, first of all, in remembering what it is that could threaten us and remembering what it is that we have to do to be able to protect ourselves. The hippocampus is also involved with other kinds of memory, long-term memory, and so on. And so one of the things we need to understand is right now our amygdala is is kind of clanging in the background because there's high amounts of alarm in our system. We don't know what's going on. Our amygdala keeps saying, be careful, be careful, be careful. And of course, I'm going to show you in a moment what happens with the hypothalamus. But just to help you understand that if you are finding that you're having memory problems, that is simply because your hippocampus is more involved right now with trying to figure out what you have to remember to stay safe and cannot hold in its, in the memory all of the other things. And this is similar with our children. If you're finding children are more forgetful than they've been before, it's because when the hippocampus is occupied with survival, it can't put things from short-term memory into long-term memory. So when the hypothalamus says all systems go, well, now we get an increase of cortisol, increase of blood sugar. We have our immune system is suppressed and altered. We get adrenaline. We have heart rate, and we're breathing more shallowly and more often. We are more vigilant. I'm sure all of you are now noticing. I know when my husband and I went for a walk, now we notice who's coming on the sidewalk opposite us. When I step into an elevator, I think about how many people. There's so many more things that we're noticing right now. And of course, the other is growth hormone, which increases glucose so that we have the energy to do what we need to do to be able to save ourselves. So what happens in our body is we get a constriction of our blood vessels. Um, in ultimate times of alarm, we get suspension of rest and digest. Now, some of you are saying, wait a minute, Eva, this isn't happening to me. I'm actually eating more. Well, once the alarm has kind of gone to a dull roar, then our body, of course, seeks more glucose because the glucose is being is pumped into our system. And so we feel the need for more energy. So if you feel you really are needing to eat, it's just your system's way of preparing you to save yourself, so to speak. Increases in breathing and heart rate, and some of us are even having blood pressure problems, and blood is diverting to the muscles. And this is very exhausting for us to be living in a constant state of this. And this is what we've been doing since March. Our emotions are meant, this whole system is meant to work in waves, ups and downs. We haven't had a lot of downs. There's always something new happening. So what we need to understand about these emotions is that they're intense and they're usually felt one at a time. These emotions can displace one another, but they're still there and they're going to be expressed at another time and another place. Just to give you a small example, when this whole thing first started, my husband and I went shopping. Now we were in a high state of alarm because we didn't, we needed to try and do all those things that we thought that we needed to do to keep ourselves safe. It also slowed down the whole process of shopping. And so while I was shopping, my alarm was in full flower. I was doing everything I could to keep myself safe and my husband safe. even though I know this intellectually, emotionally, when we got home and everything was okay, now we were in our house, we'd washed our hands, we were safe and so on. Now all of a sudden the frustration came out and my poor husband did a little thing wrong and it came out on him. And I remember the two of us looking at each other and I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how frustrated I was by all the things that we have to do when we go shopping. So this is what I mean. When it gets displaced, it comes out at another time and another place. And so what does this mean? Well, first of all, we are all in a heightened state of alarm and it has continues and continues. We are also all in a heightened state of frustration. We are also, though, because we are teachers, because we are meant to care for children, we are in heightened alpha mode. And so we are going to work very hard to keep our students safe. But what this results in is, yes, hard work, but also fatigue, a lot of anxiety and agitation. Sometimes an attack out of the blue for no reason, just like happened with my husband. Also, some resistance, and I'm going to talk about that towards the end of the talk. Just not wanting to do anymore what we have to do. We often call it COVID fatigue. And of course, that can result in absenteeism. We just become exhausted. And what's happening is we are cycling between the states. So when emotion is supposed to have this action potential and it's got to be expressed in some way. So what happens here is we have an emotion like alarm, the adrenaline and the cortisol that come with it, and it's an emotion while we're experiencing the physiological state, but it's a feeling when it comes into consciousness and we can actually name what it is that's happening. And basically with alarm, simplest way of expressing that is I am scared. When we're able to say I'm scared, when our children are able to say I'm scared, they are actually living their emotional world as it is meant to be lived, and we shouldn't get upset. But sometimes emotion is too much and our brain protects itself, the emotion is suppressed, and when it's suppressed, we have less feeling. Sometimes we can even ask a child, are you feeling scared? No, I'm not feeling scared, but it's not because the alarm isn't there, it's because the brain is protecting itself. Why does the brain protect us? Well, because it can make us feel too vulnerable. We can't constantly think about how sick we could get. Or sometimes if the people around us don't like to hear that we're scared or that we're upset in some way, then it can make us wounded and we're going to stop saying what's going on with us. The only thing is that when we have more emotion but less feeling, this is what stress is all about. Somewhere the feelings have to be let out, and I'll talk about that as we go through this talk. So when the feelings cannot come out, when the emotions cannot come out in some way, they're going to actually come out in another way. And so this is why we see more inattention because the attention is diverted by the alarm, agitation, hyperactivity, poor memory, fatigue, sometimes even numbness, some obsessions. I know people have been telling me the children are wanting to wash their hands all the time, compulsions, and of course, sometimes even panic attacks. The emotion comes out in another kind of way. Similarly, with frustration, the feeling that is associated with frustration is this isn't working, something's got to change. Very This is exactly what happens, but when the brain protects, then what ends up coming out are things like impatience, abruptness, rudeness, irritability, physical outbursts, tantrums, fatigue, and sometimes even depression. Big question that's being asked, are our children going to have mental health problems or emotional problems or be traumatized because of COVID-19? Not necessarily. Well, I'm not a therapist. How can I help them at school? Well, there are things that we can do to help, and I'm going to talk about that if we understand how emotions work. And what we need to know about emotions is that they do need to be expressed to preserve healthy functioning and well-being. They are supposed to rise up and flow through our children. The emotions in and of themselves are not a problem. How they're expressed may be a problem, but the fact that an emotion is there is actually very healthy. Emotions need to flow for children to grow. But some of them are very messy, noisy, chaotic, sometimes unacceptable, alienating, wounding. And sometimes some children are sensitive that if they let out their emotions, it can threaten a child's relationships. So the brain can actually hold it in. And some of our children who seem to be doing the best aren't necessarily, because when we hold it in because we don't want to upset the adults in our world, it can actually result in depression. And we don't we don't do this on purpose. Sometimes inadvertently this happens when we say to a child, oh, stop yelling, crying, whining, come on, calm down, don't be silly, there's nothing to be afraid of. Why are you crying? Why are you so angry? Sometimes it's because we really want to know, but they don't know because there's so much emotion inside of them. Sometimes we want them to, think happy thoughts, to be good. And again, all of these things can be helpful in small doses, but for some children, if they think that the emotion that they're experiencing can't be expressed because the person, that is caring for them isn't accepting of it, they are worried about, that affecting the relationship, and they'll hold it in. And so when there's no place for any of this kind of emotional expression, it actually gets held in, and we call that depression. Many times, the children that we're most worried about are not the ones that are holding it in. So even if there isn't a place for emotional expression in one spot, it actually can come out in another spot. As some of you know, I had a daughter who was very, very, very good at school, held all her alarm and her frustration in at school, but whoa, did it ever come out at home? And so it can come out at another time or another place. And so where some of your children are holding it in at home and it is coming out at school. Now let's just look a little bit at how frustration plays out. And again, this is the work of Dr. Neufeld. We look at the traffic circle of frustration. So when something isn't working, the first thing that we want to do is to try and change it. And that's exactly what many of us tried to do. Can't we do this? Couldn't we do that? Couldn't somebody find a vaccine? Come on, maybe this isn't so serious. But when we realize that there is nothing we can do, this can't be changed. We call that the wall of futility. Now, when we can't change something, we are actually supposed to go into adaptation. And adaptation is a process by which we are changed by that which we cannot change. And by the way, as teachers, you are some of the most adaptable people on the planet because there are so many things that you cannot change. But if you can feel your sadness and if you can tolerate the vulnerability of feeling your sadness, you actually go into the process of adaptation and you find another way through. And we'll again talk about this a little bit later. Now, if you can't in that moment feel the vulnerability required for adaptation, and it's perfectly normal, it happens to all of us, we then go around the traffic circle and what comes out, all that adrenaline and cortisol that was meant to try and change things, now moves into attack and sometimes even to the desire to hurt. Now, most of us have a prefrontal cortex that allows us to have mixed feelings, and we know that if we did what we thought we wanted to do or what we felt like doing, that we would get into a lot of trouble. And so these mixed feelings actually stop the attack and move us back into the traffic circle to either find a way to change, to find adaptation, and to figure out another way through. Now, one of the things that we've learned is that, first of all, for some people, their mixed feelings get overwhelmed. And if so the desire, the attack is there. But if we can find a way of venting and releasing this attacking energy, we then actually have can keep the attack from hurting other people. So the challenge when we're dealing with problems rooted in emotion is how can we have expression without repercussion? And our role as a caring adult is how can we have help that emotion find the expression? I see you've got emotion in you that needs help getting out. Here, let me help you to find a way that won't cause you more problems. And this, of course, is the role of a therapist, of an intervener, of a school counselor. But there are ways that we can also do this in a classroom. So, what can be done? Well, first of all, we need to recognize that frustration is huge. So, we need to come alongside it and name it. This is not how we used to do it. This is not what we want to be doing. This isn't working the way you want it to. We need to name that. We need to continually let children know that we understand how frustrating this new world is for them and also for us. So we also need to come alongside the alarm. This is worrisome. This feels unsafe. You're not sure what's happening. If we name it and talk about it, it gives children the permission to experience the emotions that are inside of them. And the biggest thing that we need to do is actually to help move towards sadness so that adaptation can happen. Now, one of the interesting things that can be useful to us in even in a school setting is play, because play actually is very, very helpful for emotional expression. When children are stirred up emotionally, their play can reflect themes that they are struggling with. Um, It's how they naturally make sense of all the emotions that they are experiencing. In play, pictures are drawn, structures are made, games are engaged in to allow the emotions to come out in a way that feels safer. But one of the things that has happened in the last little while, and this was even before COVID times, we were noticing that there was a problem. David Elkind wrote a book called The Power of Play. He says in the last 2 decades, children have lost 12 hours of free time a week, including 8 hours of unstructured play and outdoor activities. And of course, we know that some of this is because we highly structure our children's free time and also because our children are attracted to digital devices. There is even an encyclopedia of play science. Stuart Brown on the status of play said that outdoor play has increased by 71% in one generation in both the US and the UK. Now, why are they concerned about this? Well, because parallel to that, there has been an escalating diagnosis of childhood depression, ADHD, and other mental health problems that has paralleled the loss of play. When we talk about play, we're not just talking about, sort of Lego and dress up corner. We're talking about all sorts of emotional playgrounds, laughter and humor, drawing and painting, drama and theater, dance and movement, singing and music, irony and wordplay, stories and writing, teasing and silliness. These are all things that we can do in a classroom context and that we can do in a school context, of course, with its limitations, but things that we can do because these are emotional playgrounds. They allow emotion to move through children. What play offers emotion is, first of all, a work-free place for growth and development to take place. And by the way, the human brain develops in rest, and play is actually an active form of rest. So, ironically, even though children aren't engaged in formal learning, when they are engaged in play, they are actually engaged in their brain developing and growing, which will then translate into them becoming more efficient and effective learners. So we need to give this space. It's like a bubble. It's a bubble that provides safety and freedom. It's a bubble that allows a child to get engaged in what's meaningful to them. It's not work, it's not for real, and it is expressive. In that bubble is a protection for feelings, an expression of emotion without repercussion. You can do things in play, that you can act out some of your emotions that in a way that isn't necessarily hurtful because it's understood in the play context. What's really fascinating is if we observe children playing, we can see that it's like a release valve. It allows emotions to move through. For example, alarm at play. In the beginning, some of our kids were playing coronavirus tag. They were playing a lot more monster play, being the monster, scary stories. They were attracted to scary stories. They were pretending to be scared because there was so much alarm in our world. Playing disaster. Again, some of the children will be playing hospitalized and be sick because of what's happening in their world. It's a place to process their internal world. Some of them play with separation, playing dead, playing orphan, hide and seek games, fairy tales where children are lost or face separation. It is through play that children get to imagine how they will survive in the face of adversity. And this was written by one of my colleagues at the Newfound Institute, Hannah Beach. How does frustration manifest itself in play? Well, interestingly enough, one of the things about frustration is we want to make things work. So things like making puzzles is actually very satisfying for the frustrated soul. I know a lot of my adult friends were saying, "Oh my goodness, Eva, I've been making more puzzles. I've been doing more puzzles since COVID hit," partly because they were trying to fill their time, but actually puzzles are very satisfying. My recommendation in your classroom, if it's possible, is to have a puzzle table or put a puzzle in a pizza box so you can close it up and move it over and allow the children to play out their desire to organize and orchestrate things. Constructing and crafts are very helpful for this. Building, robots, Lego blocks. One of the things I've been noticing in my Facebook feeds is how many teachers are doing active things with children, getting their hands involved, and this is very helpful to deal with frustration. As I say, organizing and orchestrating. When students can't make their world work, let's give them a chance to make other things work. Of course, along with frustration comes the desire to attack or destroy. And again, I know that we want to limit this and do this in a way that is not hurtful, but we need to perhaps find ways in which there is some permission to destroy and demolish. I know that we don't have snow yet, but one of the things that a couple of schools have done is they allow children to build things in the playground and then to stomp them down because that gets out in a playful mode, this a desire to attack. Hitting and throwing. Are there balls and ball games are very helpful for that. Again, at recess time, kids do a lot of kicking of balls, a lot of screaming. That's getting out their emotions. Very much, tempted to do attacking games and war games and play fighting. And again, I know that these are all more difficult in COVID times, but actually, when they found when we give children the permission to do some of these things in a play mode, it reduces levels of frustration, decreases aggression and violence in real life. So, what are some ideas of things that we can do in our classrooms and in our schools for playful release? With older children, we could write out our frustrations, make them into paper balls or paper airplanes, and spend a little bit of time like throwing those around the classroom. And again, of course, you need to know your group. You need to know whether this is going to be over the top for some of them, but sometimes this is very helpful. And again, remember, one of the things about play is that we laugh. Do a dance party. Have a tabletop where kids can just banner paper on a table with crayons where they can just draw whatever it is they want, or on a mural. My favorite lately has been bubble wrap for stomping or egg carton crushing. It's very satisfying to do that kind of stomping. I suggest this, by the way, for the a corner in the staff room, so that we as the adults can also let that out. Spray bottle painting on paper or snow, and I'll show you that in a moment. Pool noodle sword fighting, if you have that opportunity, or using pool noodles for drumming. We need to be as creative as we can, play with our students. Playing with them can make a difference. So provide as many opportunities as you can in the day, and let the kids get it out in art. A big thing that has come up right now, and Hannah Beach has developed the whole drumming thing. And again, I'll show you in a moment where this is all written up, so you don't have to take a lot of notes right now. It's in our resource guide. But half pool noodles right now are becoming very popular as exercise, and it's very satisfying. So again, just look up half pool noodles exercising on YouTube, and you'll find all sorts of things. But it is very satisfying, and it can help get out some of that emotion. Hannah has suggested something called the frustration monster, where we get children to draw monsters, and of course they're drawing the COVID monster, and that's fine. It's not meant to be neat. It's meant to help the kids get the emotion out. This is an example of using spray bottles. And I was actually at a school last winter when I could go and visit schools where they were doing this on the snow. But the act of pressing that spray bottle, again, helps get that frustration out. So it can be done either in the classroom or on a large wall or in the snow. It's important that with our young children that we play with them. It's allows for joy and smiling. There's not enough smiling, and as we know, if we've got our masks on, our kids can't even see our smiles anymore, so they got to see our eyes. So we've got to find a lot of ways of making that. And when we and children are engaged in a joyful experience, it actually regulates our emotions. I want to just alert you to the fact that we need to be very careful right now because children desperately need their playtime. This is not something that should be earned. It should be scheduled and protected. And all children, some of them might need to be monitored in terms of how they play, but they need their playtime. In fact, the more the child's in trouble, the more they need playtime. And of course, outdoor play right now, and I know that we're having some lovely weather, so we can let our children go out, very, very healthy for children. Stories and watching movies, and these are also a playground for emotion, especially if tears are needed, because we have a lot of tears inside of us. Our children have a lot of tears, and it's easier to cry for someone else in a story or in a movie. So it's important. Don't feel badly if you're reading a story and some of the children are starting to feel sad. Actually, they're not feeling necessarily just sad for what's happening in the story, but they're letting out some of the sadness that they are feeling around school not being what it was before, around not being able to see their friends. All the things they need to cry about can come out in this third person way. But of course, we need to be careful not to judge the tears. And when we cry, we don't really need to know why we're crying. We just need to let that sadness out. And when they come, we need to see them as a sign of emotional well being. Because tears lead to adaptation. And adaptation is an emotional process whereby we are changed by that which we cannot change. It actually transforms us. But the journey of adaptation is a journey sea of sadness and tears. When I was doing a presentation many, many years ago with an absolutely stellar kindergarten teacher, and we were talking to first year teachers, and I said to her, what are you going to tell the teachers? She said, well, I'm going to talk to them about the fact that I spent my first 2 years of teaching in tears. I thought, oh my goodness, that is why you have been able to survive as an educator. And that's why you've been able to be so creative. Because once, as educators, we grieve all the things we cannot do, our brain will find something else. We have to be careful though, because sometimes we go into coping mode, and coping is fine. Coping is about managing and powering through a situation, getting through something. Adaptation is an emotional journey. We need to feel the sadness before it can result in resilience. We actually have to let ourselves go down. And it's scary because we don't know what's in the end of that abyss. It's like looking into an abyss. But having just accompanied a very dear friend of mine who had a big loss in her life, helping her to face that sadness that was so hard for her to face, I saw her bounce back, and we all have the capacity within us to bounce back, to adapt, to find another way through. We have to be careful because there's a lot of people right now that are talking, and rightly so, to try and help us get through to the next day, focus on the positive, being grateful, resisting the letdown, looking for calmness and tranquility. And these are all good coping mechanisms, but they are exhausting because we are fighting against what our system actually naturally wants us to do. So we have to find ways to allow ourselves and times to allow ourselves to feel our sadness. Adaptation requires a soft heart and a safe place to cry. A soft heart meaning that we have to be able to tolerate feelings of vulnerability, and a safe place to cry with someone who will keep us safe while we are vulnerable. And this is hard. We are all right now in such alarm that it's really hard for us, necessarily to be there. But it's one of the things that, at least for our children, some of our children at school, we need to be the safe place for them. If we can, and if we're in a position to be with a child who needs to feel their sadness, if we want to help their tears to flow, and by the way, I'm sharing this as much for you as parents, and I know that many of you, just about all of you, are parents, spouses, have someone that you care about in your life. If we know how important it is for us to feel our tears, then there are things that we can do to help the tears to flow. Usually, children will come to us quite frustrated. "Oh, this is stupid. I don't like this." Da, 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 da." Well, first we have to reflect back that emotion. Oh my goodness, that didn't work for you. That wasn't what you had in mind. Or that was scary. You weren't sure what was going to happen. Or, oh, you really wanted them to like you. Now sometimes we think, oh my goodness, if I respond and match that emotion, am I not making it worse for the child? Well, it is if you stay there. So in other words, if oh, I know, it's really scary. And if we act, so we go, yeah, that was really scary. You weren't sure what was going to happen. Now we need to gently move towards sadness. Oh my goodness, it's just there's so many things going on right now that we just aren't sure about. So we bring it into the sadness. We use silence. We wait. We wait to see if they're going to follow us down into the sadness. And oh my goodness, sometimes the minute you just give a little space for that sadness, the tears flow. And that's what we need. We need so many tears right now. If you are with a child or a student who starts to cry and you don't know why they're crying, it didn't happen because you led them there. They just, and by the way, some of you are the safe place for children. The minute they find you alone, they just took one look at you and they start crying. You go, oh my goodness, why is that child crying? Don't ask why, because there's always some reason, and they're going to give us a trivial response, but they're crying about all the things they cannot change, about all the things that are different, about so many things. Just let them cry, because it isn't the thing they're going to tell you. It's about the sea of sadness that's inside of them. When they come, sit quietly and with compassion, resist the alpha instincts, because you guys are all alphas. You all want to fix things. You all want to make things better. Don't try and make them better. Don't try and comfort them too much with, oh, it'll get better tomorrow. No, just sit there quietly. Give lots of space for the sadness and tears. And then afterwards, problem solve, give a little bit of advice, reassure, whatever, but allow that going down and coming up to happen. This is how we are going to survive in this kind of time. It's by allowing ourselves to go in and feel our sadness so we can find a way to adapt to a world that is so different. Now, resistance. All of us are starting to feel this very much. When we talk about COVID fatigue, we're actually talking about a dynamic that exists in all of us. It's called the counterwill instinct. And the counterwill instinct is there for a whole bunch of good reasons, um, but it's basically a pushing back against the will of others. We talk about having free will, of having a will of our own, of making our own decisions, and we all know we do so much better when we have decided to do something. We don't like it when someone is telling us what to do. And of course, right now in COVID times, we are all being told to do things more than we have ever before. And so we actually, this instinct that has been there and kind of underground that, rears its ugly head once in a while, now is actually coming to the fore. And so we need to recognize it and understand it. And I know that you are all very, very caring, concerned people. But if you have been surprised by the thought of, I don't want to wear my mask, where did that thought come from? I'm usually such a rule follower. Well, it's your counterwill instinct. It's actually counterwill is there because it is meant to help us grow and develop, especially in adolescence. We need counterwill so that we can develop our own way of doing things. So it's an important instinct for growth and development, but it actually also can sometimes cause other kinds of problems. So it's not a learned response. Counterwill is an emotional reaction based in instinct. And we've all had that experience. Oh my goodness, have you ever been at a store where someone has been trying too hard to sell you something? You really wanted to buy whatever item was in that store. Next thing you know, you're out the door and saying, I'm not buying from here. Well, if that salesperson is too pushy, your counterwill instinct makes you want to push back. How many of you have tried to get your spouse to do something, or your spouse wants to get you to do something, and you say, "Don't nag me. I'll do it in my own time." That's your counterwill instinct. And of course, we all know with our own children is that the more we need them to hurry, the slower they're going to go. That is this instinct of counterwill that is there. Now, the good thing about counterwill is that when attachment is strong, counterwill actually diminishes. And so we need to actively, especially in this time when there's so many things we need our children to do, that we need to actually work at engaging the attachment instincts, because when the attachment instincts are engaged, children are more willing, just as we are, to do things for the other. So collect before you direct. Get into the child's space, eyes, nod, and a smile, so that they are more willing to attach to us. In pandemic time, of course, we know that alarm will keep at bay, counterwill at bay, but it will manifest itself somewhere else. Then when there are too many have tos, there's going to be pushback somewhere. And so again, many of you have probably found that you feel like you're slogging through the mud because some of the children just don't want to do work. They refuse to do work. They don't want to follow directions. Some of them even do the opposite, or some of them are unmotivated and lethargic. And again, it's not about the work that you're giving them. It's just about they don't want to have to do something else again. So if we want to maintain the lead in the face of counterwill, we have to figure out ways of staying in charge, even if we can't be in control. And this is not easy to do because all of you know instinctively, because you are teachers, you are wired in a certain way. And the way that you're wired is you know that if a child won't listen to you, you cannot teach them. So you have this alpha instinct that basically says, listen to me. And when a child says, I'm not listening to you, your alpha instinct says you have to. And we all know what happens when we end up in that kind of a power struggle. But you also instinctively know that if you're not in charge of your classroom, then the other children, the children will become in charge of the classroom. So the way I've phrased it now is we have to figure out ways of staying in charge, even if we can't be in control. And so many of you have do this instinctively, you do it naturally, you take the temperature of your class, you told them they're going to be working for 20 minutes, after 17 or 15 minutes, everybody is getting antsy and whatever. And some of you go, you know what, 20 minutes wasn't realistic. Students, I've decided we've done enough work for today. So even though their behavior is changing your behavior, you're still the one that's in charge. And so sometimes saying, oh, let's all take a break, let's all do this, allows you to keep that position that you need to be in when you are a teacher without fighting against the counterwill instinct. When we're handling resistance, we have to understand it's not personal, that it is instinctive, and sometimes when we have to be careful to engage in a way that does no harm. We have to adjust our stance, normalizing, by conveying. Some pushback is part of the process. When I had a teacher who came to me, this was more in May and June. She said, the students, they're following all the rules, but they just don't want to work. She said, what can I do? I said, well, why don't you just talk to them about the fact there are so many have tos, and just say to them it's perfectly normal that sometimes we just don't feel like doing something that we know we're supposed to do because there's just so many have tos in our world. And she came back a week later and she said, oh my goodness, it was amazing. And I said, yeah, even play with no. Even say to the kids, okay, I'm going to ask you to do three things. And every time I ask you, I want you to say, no, we're not doing that. Make no part of the game, make it normal. And if you can get some of those no's out, then maybe the next time there will be a yes. So we need to give room for the child, give them some choice, some things that they can do, have three baskets of work. You can do this basket or this basket, and that can help with the counter will. Because of course, as we know, counter will is affected by, um, well, counter will is affected by how much we need a child to do something, so we're pushing them to do it. But it can be modulated by attachment. So if we really need them to do something, get their eyes a nod and a smile, and okay, I know this is really hard, but let's get this last little bit of work done and then we'll be able to. So try and look pleasant about it, because sometimes we tend to want to become a little bit more severe. Do give them some choices and try, when the more you need a child to do something and children to do something, sometimes you actually have to speak more softly, because then you don't evoke that counter will instinct. One of the things that we did in the beginning of the year, and some of you may have heard this particular presentation, we called it Lead, Play, Learn Together, and we developed some guiding principles. I will again show you where you can find this on our website, but basically, one of the things that we said, okay, so if we can get through these times, we're going to need to do certain things that will make it easier for us to help our children to behave in the way we want them to. So I'm not going to go through these in detail, but they basically were set up the environment to guide and maximize the behavior. Use play and playful activities to guide and change the behavior. Transition songs, all the things that kindergarten teachers do, we should be doing grade 1, 2, 3, and even all the way to grade 6. Establish and practice routines, obviously. Put academics into perspective. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Do get into the lead. Have a plan for challenging behavior and have a plan for difficult situations. In terms of putting academics into perspective, well, the thing about it is, first of all, I know we're all worried about all that the students have missed. But in reality, they have missed out on academic skills, but the brain development and learning continues to happen even when they were at home, even when they are not at school. Interestingly enough, brain development happens during rest. Okay, but the part of the brain that is actually involved in problem solving and comprehension can only develop in rest. So some of our children actually have come back to us in better shape than before they left, especially with that long break that they had between March and June. So we have to be careful that we don't, make this worse than it is, because the human brain actually needs skills to survive in society, but it needs the maturation of another part of the brain, and that part of the brain you can't teach. So a lot of what you're going to have to do is using things like student portfolio to track progress, using a learning continuum, just so that you know where your students are. I know that students are missing because they're sick or whatever. Keep track of it and just try and figure ways of working around it. And just understand that assessment this year is likely to be about improvement and progress and not about test performance. We are basically in a marathon right now. We're in a marathon. We have to be careful not to push too hard, because if we push too hard, our children will get exhausted and we will get exhausted. And remember, everybody else in the province, in the country, and in the world are in the same place that you are. Our children are having to learn differently, but we will get through this. There have been times and other times in our history when this has happened, and we have been able to get through it. So we have to sometimes just give ourselves a break. We want to make sure that we engage the attachment instincts as much as possible. Collect before you direct. Remember, get into their space, get their eyes, get a nod and a smile. In that moment, the child is in seeking mode and we are in providing mode, and they are much more likely to follow us. When we find that a student is no longer following the lead, go back to the collecting ritual. Use an attachable tone. Find a way to catch the student's eye, nod, and a smile in a playful mode. Sometimes teachers use clapping or all sorts of different ways of getting children's attention. That makes it fun. And if you do have to raise your voice, just remember, especially some of our poor little ADHD kids, they don't notice until our voice is raised. And usually when our voice is raised, we are getting a little bit irritated. And there's some little kids that only ever see when we are sort of, Billy, when Billy looks at us, try and smile. I'm glad you're looking. Now let's do this. We need to convey a strong alpha presence. Continually give the children the message that we are there and taking care of them. We need to take charge of situations that affect the children, anticipate and prevent. And again, I know that Halloween has just passed, and many of you probably knew that during the Halloween festivities that you had to do things a bit differently because you knew it would be hard on your kids. And that's exactly what we're talking about. For some of our students, we need to specifically ask, when does a student have difficulty? Where do they have difficulty? With whom does a student have difficulty? And this, of course, is something you need to do with your school team, because sometimes the school, the teachers, all of us have to do things differently to make it easier for this child to do what we need them to do. In conveying the strong alpha presence when we don't know what to do, we need to continually act confident. And by the way, you guys are masters at this. I'm always amazed at how calm you seem on the surface when I know you're paddling like mad underneath. And we need to use phrases like, we'll figure this out, we'll find somebody to help us. If you have concerns or worries, try and avoid expressing them in front of the students. You can share some of your emotions, but not your biggest worries, because and giving children more information, as Dr. McNamara said, information doesn't make a child feel secure, relationships do. If we're in caring and leading mode, which we call right relationship, then our children will have trust in us and faith in us that we will provide for them. I'm actually more concerned about the adults right now having a hard time with what's going on. Many children, when they look to us and we say, we'll take care of you, can go back to being children. Now, what about me? Because it's important as well that we understand. So very interesting, as I say, the neuroscience is coming out that we're understanding more and more. And Emily and Amelia Nagoski wrote a book called Burnout. And it's so interesting because one of the main things that they talk about in their book is the fact that when emotion moves through us, we have to complete that cycle. We have to let that wave come through. And one of the ways in which they recommend that we allow that cycle to come through are very much what I've been talking about today: physical activity, breathing, positive social reaction, laughter, affection, a 20-second hug. Of course, that's only with people that are in your very, very small bubble, having a cry, and creative expression. So exactly that. Make sure that you identify your own support system, your village at school and at home, including, also give yourself permission to vent. Find someone that is willing to allow you to let it out. And there's lots of things. If you can't vent in front of other people, that makes you feel, give yourself permission to slam a few doors. Get yourself some bubble wrap. Give yourself permission to just say all those things in a non-hurtful way to somebody that's not going to get hurt. All the things that you're thinking in your head, because we've got to get it out. Then find a way to find your own sadness and tears. I know for me, the best way for me is to watch sad shows or sad movies. Thank goodness This Is Us is back, because every time I watch that show, I have a good cry. Warn the people in your world that you might be actually crying more than the story warrants, because as educators, we need to grieve the vision of school. This is not the vision that we had of school in our hearts. And nurture your passions. Have some playtime. Make sure that we give, and same with your children. Don't give so much homework that children don't have time to be able to play, and don't make it so hard for you that you have to work so hard at night. We all have to give ourselves lots and lots of space. We are in a marathon and we don't know where it's going to end. At the Center of Excellence, we have created resource guides. So if you go to cebm.ca, click under coronavirus for schools, I think is actually on our front page right now. You will find our resource guide in English and most of it in French as well. We also had a resource guide that goes with the Lead, Play, Learn, and also some of it in French. You might find some ideas there, even though it's not the beginning of the year anymore, but some ideas that are helpful to you. So go to our website. They're all downloadable as PDFs. And so please feel free to download them and use them as much as you can. The challenge we have when dealing with a world full of frustration and alarm. How can we help emotion find expression that won't cause more problems? We need to find ways of venting and releasing. We need to create space for finding sadness and tears. And one of the best ways that we can do that is to create space for play.